Past the hills and rivers wide, where wildflowers freely bloom. In this land with skies so open, where can our children play? In cities bustling bright and loud, cars and lights that never sleep, do they find a piece of sky? Where can our children play? Bring them fields of green and gold, let their laughter echo clear. In a world so tightly wound, where can our children play? Mountains whisper ancient tales, forests sing in harmony. Will these wonders slip away? Where can our children play? Beyond the screens and towers tall, where dreams once were born and bred, do they carve new paths of joy? Where can our children play? Let's be stewards of this earth, guard the spaces wide and free. Do they find a piece of sky? Where can our children play? Fields of green and gold, let their laughter echo clear. In a world so tightly wound, where can our children play? Bring them fields of green and gold, let their laughter echo clear. In a world so tightly wound, where can our children play?
Top, Carly, President Trump not as generous when it comes to Hamas demanding the release of the 59 remaining Israeli hostages from Gaza. Dozens are believed to be dead. Trump posting on Truth Social, release all the hostages now, not later, and immediately return all the dead bodies of the people you murdered, or it is over for you. I am sending Israel everything it needs to finish the job. Now, yesterday, Trump met with 8 hostages released from Gaza who told the president in the Oval Office they didn't think they'd be free without his return to the White House.
Good afternoon, everyone. My name is Laurie Gagan, and I'm your host today on Main Street Media, Utah, part of the Wellness Crusaders talk radio show. I am actually quite honored today to be interviewing a colleague and a dear friend of mine that I met a couple years ago at a health event in Utah. His name is Kevin Tuttle. He is the founder of Spirit PR. Kevin is a former Air Force public affairs officer, and he has the expertise on talking about how MAGA and MAHA can have a positive impact for Israel. So Kevin, when I met him, was living in Madison, Wisconsin. And since then, him and his family, his beautiful wife, his 2 children, have moved to Israel, where he has joined his father out there. So Kevin, I'm ready to start. And again, I'm super excited about this one. But tell us a little bit about yourself.
Well, thank you for having me, Laurie. It's an honor to be on with you, a dear friend of mine as well. So thank you for considering me for the show. As far as who I am, I'm a dad, first and foremost. And that's how I got into this medical freedom world many years ago when my kids were born. My daughter's 16, my son is 15, and we had to make decisions before they were born about vaccines. And that's when I started researching into, the risks of vaccines, because I had a distrust of doctors overall, especially coming out of the Air Force, where I had many very poor experiences with doctors. I won't get into that, but it really opened my eyes to some of the things that are happening in the medical world. So I started doing research. I read a book called Evidence of Harm in 2007, before my daughter was born the following year. And it made me see right away the corruption in the vaccine program, the way that doctors get together to try to bury uh, negative information about vaccines and that sort of thing. And I told my wife, we're not vaccinating. We're not going to do this. And obviously it was a discussion. I didn't command my wife, we're not doing this. But so we had a very in-depth conversation for many weeks about this, and we both agreed, let's not vaccinate. And then it went beyond that. Let's not even use a hospital. Let's have a home birth. And so both of our children actually were born at home as well. And that's how I got into this world of medical freedom. And what really propelled it was seeing the propaganda about the flu shot in 2016. I remember that fall. It was very vivid, where one commercial after another was about, it used to be about, get your flu shot to protect yourself. But the messaging had changed. And coming from a public affairs background in the Air Force and thereafter, I knew a lot about messaging. I'm like, that they're changing this now, because it's no longer get your shot to protect yourself. It's, if you don't get your shot, you're putting everyone else at risk. And that's how the commercials had changed. And I said, this is really wrong now. And I started speaking out on social media about it, and lost basically all my friends because I dared to question vaccines. But then I found a lot of people out there who had the similar thoughts that I did, and started networking and getting involved in this beautiful medical freedom world, where eventually I met people like Robert Scott Bell, and I work on his show now, one of his producers, to bring on fantastic guests to the show. And so Robert is a homeopath. I'm sure your audience, especially in Utah, know him because he's local there.
Yes, we do. Yes. And then, so you founded the Spirit PR. And when you and I met at the event that Kristen Chevier put on,
Mm-hmm.
you kind of saw, I guess, what I was doing. And then we started talking about 10letters.org and Dr. Richard Fleming. And then for a period of time, you worked with us as the PR person for 10letters.org to get us all, include, Dr. Richard Fleming obviously was the best of the best, but you worked with getting Dr. Richard Fleming and Jim and I and 10letters.org for quite some time to get some interviews with some pretty prominent people as well. So
Yes, yeah. And Spirit PR came about. I guess I have to go through COVID a little bit, because the world kind of revolves. This is now, what do we see? BC post or BC and AD. So now we have AC, right? After COVID or whatever. But
6
so
years,
during,
the 6th year, sadly.
yeah, it's been a crazy time. But during COVID, I was working at a job, doing construction type stuff, because it was a job where I didn't have to be bothered by anybody telling me to put on a mask. So I refused to do that. I got fired from a job because I didn't wear a mask. So this construction job, where I was just putting up gutters and working on my own, and I absolutely loved it because I got to use my hand. I got hands. I got to be outside. So I was doing this for a while. I knew it would be a stopgap. And on the side, I was working for Robert Scott Bell. And one of the guests that came to our attention was Scott Shara, whose daughter, Scott is also from Wisconsin. He lived about an hour and a half north of me. And his daughter, Grace, was killed in a hospital in Wisconsin. And she was 19 years old. She had Down syndrome, and she got COVID. So he took her to the hospital, and, they put fear in his heart. And unfortunately, they admitted her. And in a week, they killed her at that hospital. And it's a big case. He's actually, Scott now is suing the doctors, the nurses, the administration, anyone who messed with his daughter. They're in this lawsuit, and that's coming up in June, actually, where they're actually going to court. So it's an exciting thing. But I met Scott through the Robert Scott Bell show, and he reached out to me just out of the blue while I'm on my ladder one day in a freezing cold Wisconsin winter. And he says, thank you for having me on the show. There was something about you that really resonated with me, and I'm hoping you can help me. My story is getting out there. I need some help booking some additional podcasts and managing a calendar and everything for me. Or do you know anybody who can do that? And Scott had no idea about my history, my public affairs history. That I was in the medical freedom movement. He had no idea about any of it. All I did was book him on the show. So I started laughing, and I said, Scott, I think this is God right now, because I've actually been praying for something to open up, because I feel like there's a lot that I could give to the world through people like you who are able to tell these amazing stories. I have public affairs experience. I understand what it's like to work with the media, to pitch the media, to correct the media, and those sorts of things. So Scott and I started working together full time. He was my only client at the time, but I got him on a bunch of shows during that time. And then I thought, you know what? Now there's obviously, within COVID, there were so many stories coming out of all sorts of malfeasance and people struggling and everything. And I thought there's probably a lot of people out there who need help to get their stories told. So I created Spirit PR as a way to do that and to give glory to God for bringing me to where I am, which is why I named it Spirit PR.
I love it because it's always about glory to God. And as you well know, too, that I had a brother living in Idaho who was murdered in a hospital in Idaho. He did not have the COVID shots. He did get COVID. He couldn't get the right treatment, which, ivermectin, hydroxychloroquine, sometimes antibiotics. I mean, sometimes sometimes Western medicine is designed when you've got an acute infection, but he couldn't get anything. And the only thing he could get is remdesivir, which is another pharmaceutical drug. And I basically had told his family, like, listen, if this is not what he's getting, and there's never 100% guarantee that ivermectin is, going to prevent death, but it's 98% certain that you're not going to die. And he couldn't get it. Remdesivir blew up his kidneys, vented, and 5 days later, he was dead. So you and I share this passion, and I've been following Scott's story actually since I met you. And there's a big group of us that have him in his prayers, losing a 19-year-old daughter. My brother was 64 time. I mean, you're losing somebody, and there were millions and millions of deaths with uninformed consent. And so my prayers go out to each and every family who have had a family member or a friend, either injured or someone who passed. So, but thank you for sharing what you did. Let's get to one of the key points where you and I were talking a little bit about some things before the recording went on. So we hear a lot of fake news, and I think really President Trump was really inspirational in getting the fake news out there. But so we hear a lot of it here. I have a lot of my friends that will send me something like, oh my gosh, did you hear this in Israel? And as you well know, I always text you to say, hey, is this true? Is it not true? But let's talk about the truth. What is truly happening in Israel right now? I would like for you to enlighten our listeners on the truth of the war, as well as the safety there, because you more than anybody else knows what's happening. So let's talk about some of the things that have transpired.
Absolutely. I could talk to my own personal experiences with this. I'm not the official Israeli spokesperson by any means. And, I'm a civilian. I live along the coast. I live about an hour north of Haifa, of Tel Aviv, a little bit south of Haifa. And so our area, we're neither by Gaza or by Lebanon. And, for the first year of this war, like, besides, the mourning that took place, the sorrow that we all felt for October 7th and the shock and horror and all those things, everyday life here where I live was not really impacted. I didn't. There wasn't bombings here. There wasn't much going on. We didn't even have to go into our bomb shelter for almost the first year, and then that changed. So once Hezbollah got more involved, we began having to go in the bomb shelter frequently, and it just became a part of life. You hear the siren go off, you run down into the shelter, and a few minutes later you leave. So
describe for me what a family bomb shelter is.
okay, it's about a 10 by 10 reinforced room. So it's a lot of rebar, a lot of, I don't know how they construct it necessarily, but if a bomb were to hit outside, you would be safe. And it has a really thick door on it that can only be opened from the inside. And so you got to pull that door shut. There's even, steel that goes over the window. You pull the steel window cover over the window in case a bomb explodes out there, a missile explodes, so it doesn't shatter the window. And yeah, it's a very secure room. My dad actually, he lives with us, and he lives in the bomb shelter. That's where his bedroom is. So it wasn't so bad for us to go in there, because we just go in there and we sit on my dad's bed and we wait it out for a few minutes. But that my experience is not the experience of the vast portion of Israel by any means. If you lived in Tel Aviv, anywhere south of there, what they have to go through or had to go through on a daily basis was pretty horrific. Just living in constant fear. The rockets coming in all the time. It's awful. It's awful because Gaza, they had an opportunity. Since 2005, the IDF and Israel, they withdrew completely from the Gaza Strip. It was strictly Palestinian. Do whatever you want with it. And what they chose to do was build 300 miles of tunnels and starting to procure rockets. And yeah, that's what they ruined their chance at a decent life by being fueled by the hatred that they have to kill Jews. And that is their number one goal. It's why there will never be a two-state solution. That is a foolish, nonsensical idea that will ever exist, because it's part of their anger, their mantra, everything is about killing Jews. And they raise their children to want to kill Jews. It's part of the Quran too. It says, the trees will call out that there is a Jew behind this tree, come and kill him. So, and I'm probably going to be offensive here, but it's a really evil thing to have such a mindset, to have a religion that has that in it, to kill a certain group of people. So I think Islam to me is an evil religion.
And you know what? We're seeing an uptick here as well in the United States. I see an uptick here in Utah with a lot of the Venezuelans, some Muslims. Our governor, Spencer Cox, has allowed this illegal immigration, and we've seen the uptick in crime. Even here in the valley that I live in, Heber Valley, there have been 3 murders, and everything seems to be hush hush. Nobody wants to talk about it. So let's talk.
So you got to ask yourself, but what is that? And it's not just in Utah. It's going to be happening more and more in the U.S. and Western Europe is a disaster about that. In Germany, you have all sorts of car rammings and knifings and stuff, knife attacks, and they never say it's a Muslim. All the news reports right away is a man attack, and then you find out, okay, this man was from Somalia or from all these Muslim countries, and they don't want to put that out there. And I don't understand if it's a fear of Islam or a self-hating attitude that they have for their own country, and they the white guilt or whatever it is. I don't understand it, but I hope it stops soon, because I can't think of a country that is better for having Islam in it.
Right. And I'll make a comment on what you just said. One, for me, I'm glad President Trump is in office here in America.
Yes.
But I think with some of the policies he's passing, especially about, the gang violence here and getting rid of the transgender. Um,
Mhm.
there's a difference. I follow what the Bible says when it talks just even about homosexuality. But transgenders are a little bit different. And I think what happened in America during the Biden administration is that we were being feared or taught, and the children being taught, that everything seemed to be racist. You couldn't call, somebody of,
Right.
I'm Asian, I'm yellow, I'm proud of it. But there are dark skinned people and there are light skinned people and there are olive skinned people. But I think what ended up happening during the 4 years with Biden is everything became racist and it became,
Yes.
let's protect the transgender community, say maybe possibly 0.51% of America. And what had happened is us as Christians ended up suffering. Where was our protection? Not that I want to go down the rabbit hole, but I just kind of wanted to put that in perspective of what we saw in America. But let's go back and let's talk about like your children. Um, how did they handle the situation? And is there still terrorists going on where you currently live, which I guess is considered the safer part of Israel?
First of all, my children are warriors. They're very tough. Part of the reason I wanted to bring them to Israel and why we moved here was what I was seeing in the States, and not just from them, but from most everybody who lives in the States, is a sense of unappreciation for what it is that you have there, how easy life is overall. Not to say that there are no problems, that there aren't, financial issues or anything like that, but overall, as a country, everything is at your fingertips. And I knew Israel was a bit different. It's a very Western country, still very modern, but it's not an easy place to live. It's you know, take things like parking. Um, you go to a supermarket and good luck finding parking. So the stress level for everything that you do here is extremely high. Uh, and then with my kids not speaking Hebrew before we got here, that was a big challenge for them. We have to go to a high school, but my son was in eighth grade when we moved here, and he had to navigate all day long listening to Hebrew that he doesn't understand. And same with my daughter in 10th grade at the time. So, but they managed. They got through, their year of school, and now they're on through their second year, and they've learned so much Hebrew. They've gotten immersed in the culture with friends. My son plays baseball competitively, which you didn't think would be in Israel, right? You don't think of Israel and baseball, but there's a lot of Americans here. So quite a few baseball teams, which has been a life-saving thing for my son, especially because, that was one of the things he thought he would never get to do again, is to play baseball. So it's, we're super grateful for having that here. But my kids are tough. They're definitely getting through. And I think that they're learning to appreciate when something is simple, when something works correctly, when customer service. Oh my God, customer service is just awful here. You go into a store and it's like they're angry at you for coming in, or it's a little bit bizarre, but you get used to it, right? You get used to anything, which again is why citizens of the U.S. are so you're spoiled, because you're used to everything being so great and easy, and people are friendly and wide open spaces and all of that. None of that exists here. It's a very you got to be tough to live here. So, but you asked about terrorism, and yes, that it still occurs regularly. Since October 7th, obviously you get the terrorism of rockets flying and missiles flying, and bigger things coming from Iran. But then you have your individual terrorists too. In fact, so my daughter goes to a boarding school that's about a half an hour away from us, and she gets to come home on Thursday evenings for Shabbat. So on Saturday evening, I can take her back to school. And I was picking her up last Thursday and getting off at the exit where her school is, and all of a sudden the traffic backed up, and about 7 or 8 emergency vehicles pass on my right, on the shoulder, and then I knew something had happened there nearby. And sure enough, there's a bus station, a bus stop that's just down the road from there, and a terrorist rammed his car into that bus stop, and I think it was 12 people that he injured. And then he got out of the car, and there was a police officer there, and he ran and stabbed the police officer, and then he was shot and killed at the scene. So, it's one of these moments where what I try to preach to my kids all the time is keep your head on a swivel. If you're at a bus stop, don't just sit in your phone, your phone in your face.
Right.
Look, you never know who's coming up, who's going to leave a bag. And we had the bus incident here just 2 weeks ago, 3 weeks ago, something like that, where um, buses were being exploded, and they had these bombs that were supposed to go off the following morning. And thank God, it was a real miracle. I really believe that these bombs went off at the wrong time, and they foiled this big terrorist plot to have another October 7th type of event on that following morning. So, yeah, terrorism happens all the time. There are a lot of people, but it's preached to them as children where they want to be martyrs. Their goal is to get to heaven by being a martyr, and so they value death. That's the sad thing. Is the Jewish community here, people, anyone other than Islam. There's Christians who live here. There's others, but we all value life.
Right.
We want to live. We want to enjoy the beauty of everything, and they value death. And tell me how you're supposed to have them for a neighbor when they just want to kill you all the time. It's not a sustainable idea. And finally, after Israel has existed since 1948 as a nation, and this is the first time that anyone had enough courage, like President Trump, to say it's time to put an end to this. These people need to leave Gaza. We need to turn it into something else. Like, how many times are you going to keep repeating the same thing over and over? Because if we, allow Hamas to stay in power there, within months, maybe years, there's going to be another attack. It's what they do all the time. So thank God for President Trump for having common decency and common sense, and giving some new ideas to bring in, lasting peace in the Middle East.
Amen to that. So the terrorist that they shot and killed, was he Muslim?
Yes, of course.
Does it make the news where you live? Because I haven't seen anything come across like that in the United States about that, but we don't really see a lot of.
It does make the news here, but Israel is also, we have as many, if not more, leftist news organizations, as the US. So there's a lot of, anti-Israel messaging on a lot of the Israeli news channels. But yes, the terrorist attack was in the news. The bus bombings were in the news. They do report on these types of things, but it's very leftist here as well in too many important areas, like the judicial system, which is itself really messed up.
All corrupt. So
Yes. Yeah.
let's get on the go to another question. Actually, the first question in regards to President Trump. So from your perspective as a former public affairs officer, tell me about how you see President Trump's approach to Israel in the first 50-ish days differing from Biden's approach over the last 4 years.
It's completely night and day. Biden did absolutely nothing to help Israel. In fact, the first day after October 7th, one of the first messages, it might have even been that same day, that Biden responded to the attack by encouraging Israel not to retaliate. That is the kind of support. That is no support. Who needs that kind of support? He did nothing but embargo weapons to us, put all these obstacles in place. Meanwhile, as the Doge with Elon Musk has found with USAID, they were funneling billions of dollars to Hamas during this time. So to think that a president of the United States, who's supposed to have Israel as its strongest ally, which traditionally it has been, funneling the terrorist organization that just killed 1,200 of our innocent civilians. It's unfathomable. It, but it's not surprising from the Biden administration. Look what he's doing to America itself. Wide open borders. Who knows how many Hamas terrorists and Hezbollah and ISIS and whoever else you have in the United States now, because there was no vetting these people. They just came across the border intentionally. That was intentionally done by that administration. So to have Trump come in now and put an end to that, to close the US borders, to give some new ideas for the Middle East, to start sending weapons that we need here, and all of that, it's such a different feel. And you see signs all over the place here, billboards, electronic billboards, downtown Tel Aviv and other places, saying, "Thank you, Trump, welcome back," and all these types of things. There's a barber shop in Jerusalem that has a big banner above it with President Trump's President Trump standing in the banner, right? So it's very, very pro-Trump. People understand that he has our back more than anybody in history, and like we've never seen before, right? To use Trump's phrase itself, but it really is. It feels so much different than it did at the beginning of January, where we couldn't fight back. That was the goal of the Biden administration, was to not have Israel fight back, and only try to protect ourselves a little bit, to the bare minimum. Don't hurt too many people. Don't go into Rafah, which was a huge den of tunnels and weapon smuggling and everything. They didn't want us to go into Rafah. Like, why? It's unbelievable. All under the guise of the starving Palestinians, which is complete ruse. There are so many fat Palestinians down there. I mean, there's no way that anybody is starving. And so, yes, there's light is all I can say now. There's light, there's hope, and we definitely feel supported by President Trump.
It's awesome to hear that coming from your voice, Kevin. And one of the things I think during Biden's term, I mean, me as a patriot, at the very end, I caught myself telling Jim, like, listen, I'm like embarrassed to be American citizen where we are right now. I mean, they wanted us to live in fear. And when you stood up to say or podcast, and we had our podcast taken down, I mean, they fear factored. They took doctors' licenses. They imprisoned people here, trying to fear them in, not to speaking the truth. And it just got so very at the very end. And God forbid Kamala would have got in. There was nowhere safe to go if she would have got in.
No.
Love the fact that Trump and Vance and Elon, that it's America's first. Not that we don't love other countries, but our borders are so insecure, and we've got so many gangs and murderers now that I'm glad he's saying, let's listen, let's put the money, let's lock down our own borders, let's work with ICE, let's get them out of the country, and let's put America first so that we can help other countries. So thank you for answering.
Yeah, and with the speech that President Trump gave the other morning to Congress, it was such an amazing speech. But if you saw the left, their behavior when a little boy, 13-year-old boy with brain cancer, was honored,
Disgusting.
what kind of callousness, what kind of inhumanity can you have to not stand up and applaud this little boy? But that is the left. That is the Democrats in the United States. Unfortunately, that is leftists everywhere. They're never happy. They're always miserable at their own lives, at everything. They're a miserable bunch of people. And you can see their true colors when somebody like that, or Laken Riley's mother, they don't stand for anything. They just want misery, and they deserve to lose their seats. And I just hope to see more of that happening in the future, because these people, they're just callous, and I hate apathy. I hate when people don't hate evil, and the Democrats don't seem to hate evil at all.
Right. And then you had the women in the pink shirts that also didn't stand. Yeah, and
Right.
I think if I was the mom and of the one that had the deceased daughter, I probably would have stood up on national TV and said, "You're cowards and you should be ashamed of yourself.
Hmm.
How dare them?" And Nancy Pelosi and her frickin' purple mask. I mean, she's had so much plastic surgery and
I know.
it's just like God must be waiting for her at the pearly gates to say, "Hey, guess what? No entrance."
Right, right.
Let's go to the next question. So, one of President Trump's most significant moves was recognizing Jerusalem as Israel's capital and relocating the U.S. embassy there. Tell me about how that decision was received in Israel.
So I can tell you what my dad told me because I didn't live here at the time when that happened, but obviously my parents have lived here for a long time. So obviously I kept in touch with my parents and would hear a lot about their perception of things. And I remember this very, very well during that time because, the world was saying if Trump were to do this, if he were to put the embassy in Jerusalem, there would be World War III. All sorts of hell would break out. And what really happened was absolutely nothing other than, finally telling the world that yes, Israel, their capital belongs in Jerusalem, which is God's holy city. It only makes sense to put it there. And obviously it meant a lot to people in Israel to have that happen. And there was complete peace. Nobody did anything about it. And, there was a lot of fear mongering, of course, that yeah, this is going to cause riots, it's going to cause everything, and nothing happened. It was a peaceful day. It was, and it's been great. There hasn't been any issue with having the embassy there, and now more and more countries are putting their embassies in Jerusalem rather than Tel Aviv.
That's awesome. Do you think it'll help shape the U.S. Israel relations?
To have the embassy in, are you asking?
And do you think that because it's now there and they see what President Trump has been doing and what has happened, do you think it'll help the relations with America and Israel?
Well, I think the biggest thing that helps the relation with America is to have President Trump back in office. Israel had a pretty terrible relationship with the Biden administration, with the Obama administration, basically with any uh, Democrat administration. There's always a very poor perception of Israel. So to have President Trump, who did more for Israel in his first term than most presidents before him, and that one act of putting the embassy in Jerusalem really solidified that trust factor, first of all. And I think he and Netanyahu have a really good relationship. No matter how you feel about Netanyahu, he is the prime minister, and he and Trump do get along. Actually, I'd like to see Netanyahu take a little bit more of a Trump stance now and finish Hamas. Like take Trump's lead and say, yes, give us back our hostages. It's been, what are we at, 515 days, something like that, that these hostages have been in those tunnels being starved. The only starvation that's happening in Gaza is to our hostages. And some of these are Americans. And, that's the big thing with the Biden administration, too, that we're supposed to have in America. When I was in the military, no man left behind. You don't leave a body behind. We were preached that all the time when we were in Afghanistan. Like, if you're in a shootout, whatever happens, no man left behind. We don't leave Americans behind. And that's exactly what Biden did in the withdrawal of Afghanistan with our hostages, American hostages taken by Hamas, and who have been housed in these tunnels, being starved, being abused. Who knows what else is happening to them. And Biden couldn't have cared less. Kamala couldn't have cared less. So to have Trump back there is fantastic, and I hope it finishes up now. This war has been going on long enough, and much is talking about since October 7th. It's been going on for decades and decades, and it will only continue if we don't put a complete end to them.
Agreed on that, and we're hopeful here in the United States as well. So Biden faced criticism for not pressuring Israel enough on the humanitarian issues in Gaza. So from your fresh perspective, How can Trump and his administration, what are your hopes from your perspective on making a difference?
I mean, if we're talking from a humanitarian standpoint, to have, you know, innocent women and children, I have a hard time even saying that phrase because I understand what they do in Gaza, how the women teach their children to want to be martyrs and all of that. But let's say, for argument's sake, that these are innocent women and children who actually deserve a safe place to go. Why would you want them to stay in Gaza? Why wouldn't you want to open them up to other countries, to Jordan, to Morocco, to wherever else where they could actually have a decent life, or maybe they wouldn't have to be consumed by such hatred for Jews? Um, Move away from that area if you hate the Jews so much, and then you don't have to worry about the Jews, right? So it seems like a very sensible thing. You know, humanitarian, the amount of food that was put into Gaza is just astronomical. I mean, we're talking hundreds of trucks per day filled with food. It's more than the entire population of Gaza. There was absolutely no starvation. There was no genocide. All of these catchphrases that have been tossed out there is clickbait, and it's also a way to blood libel the Jews. Again, has been happening throughout history. There's always the Jews are always to blame for everything. So God forbid that we have our own country that infuriates people, right? So this isn't new that Israel's attacked, that Israel's condemned. This goes back to Bible times. So I'm not surprised at the reaction of the world, but it's tiresome. You really get sick of being blamed for everything when we're just trying to live in peace. I go shopping at the organic store down in the mall, for example, which is just down the hill from where I live. And I think nearly everybody in that place is an Arab, but they're Israeli Arabs, and they're very peaceful. They're very kind. We all get along great. There's no problems, but it's the other kind. It's the Palestinian anger, those types that are really a detriment to this country, and where the anger and everything comes from, where that's fueled from, comes from that area. And I think it's also going to be happening in, excuse me, in Judea and Samaria, what is known as the West Bank. Those are actually Israeli territories that should be our country, but they're filled with terrorists as well. And I mentioned the bus bombings that happened recently. The plan was to have those people come out of Judea and Samaria to attack, and Jerusalem is right there.
So, Kevin, let's talk about why the Israelis support President Trump. What have you heard there from even your neighbors? What's one of the biggest reasons why they are supporting him?
Well, I think common sense is the biggest attribute that he's bringing to the table. The Israelis watch the news. We watch the news from America too. Everybody's online, so it's not like you have to only watch what's on TV here. You can go on YouTube and see American news. So everybody understands what has been happening in the U.S. with the open borders, with the transgender issue. All these things are insane ideas to most people here. So to see a president come back that is just like, he's not doing anything that radical, in my opinion. He's just bringing common sense back. Like this isn't rocket science to put our embassy in Jerusalem, for example, so things like that are just very. It seems like it should be easy to understand, and he's tough though. That's the other attribute of Trump that is really a welcome sight now. Is Biden was just pushed around by everybody. If he's not falling up the stairs himself, he is just getting pushed by Jordan, by Syria, by Egypt, by Qatar, by all of these countries that have an interest in keeping the Palestinians where they are and keeping this war going. And, Biden went right along with it. And the Democrat Party went right along with it. So to have people who are standing up for Israel, who really believe that we have a right to exist. The fact is, we do exist. And, there are countries who still refuse to even put Israel on their map. There was never a country named Palestine. That is a fallacy. There was never a people named Palestine. Israel got the name Palestine after the Romans took over the area. And as a slap in the face to Jews, they renamed it. And it carried that name until Israel got the country back in 1948. So this whole mantra of your stolen land and all of these things, it's just all false. It's fake news, as Trump would say. So to have him in office and bring common sense and toughness and somebody who really does believe that Israel is an ally, it's fantastic.
Good. So I have two follow-up questions before we move on to my favorite subject, which is Maha, and you mentioned an organic restaurant. But so social media, you mentioned, I really think that the conventional media, people going to TV and all that stuff, it's kind of really in the past. And I believe that we're getting the younger generation, because you can create the memes, you can create those. You're really honestly seeing the truth, although there are some really pretty dumb people out there when they've got purple hair and cat whiskers painted on their face, and they're sitting there crying like, oh my gosh, I'm so in fear. I can't go to my house because Trump's in the office. I want to put that out there. How is social media there for you? Are you allowed to access everything from YouTube to Epic to Instagram, or are there things put in place where you're not supposed to be on certain type of social media, like Hong Kong or China?
No, I mean, from what my kids tell me, I don't let them go on a whole ton of social media, but they do have Instagram. No TikTok for my kids, but their friends are all on TikTok and Snapchat and Instagram, and nobody uses Facebook anymore, I don't think. But they're, what the youth are using, all these types. There's no censorship here or anything, so you're allowed to be on any of these platforms. The only type of censorship comes from the companies themselves, perhaps, who may be leftists and don't want Israel to have access to their apps. But I don't know that that's happening for sure.
Okay. What's your opinion on how you feel about Doge in the United States? Are they hoping for a Doge in Israel?
Well, I'm sure the leftists here are not hoping for Doge, but I think it's needed. There's Every country has corruption. Every country has fraud, waste, and abuse. And to have somebody like Elon Musk, I mean, how cool is that? I mean, does this guy need this in his life? Trump mentioned that in his speech too. Like, he doesn't need this. And absolutely, that's what I thought when they started talking about this. I'm like, doesn't he have like SpaceX and Tesla and God knows what else, and Twitter or X? He's got time to now go around to all of these offices and find their.
Yeah.
But all right, cool. Let's take it. Let's take him up on his offer to work for free. So I think it's great.
Yes, he is the guy to do it. So a final question on this area. And so I've got some friends, I think, and I try to stay out of it because I'm not really following everything that's going on in Israel with the Jews and Hamas. But I do have a couple of friends that have mentioned the other side of why they feel for the people of Hamas. Can you say anything in regards to that? Like, why would someone feel more for Hamas than for the Jews? Because I don't understand that.
I think it goes back to kind of what we were talking about earlier, in making people feel guilty and everything being about race. It has to do with that, and it has to deal with the bully versus the bullied viewpoints, right? So we have this image that Israel is the big, powerful bully, and they're just picking on these poor Gazans. They're always picking on them. They live in an outdoor prison. They have no freedom. All of this stuff is false. But I can see when the media is portraying images like that. I don't know if you've heard about this BBC documentary that came out recently on Gaza, and they followed a Gazan boy. They mistranslated all sorts of things in that documentary. Um, and it turns out that that boy that they were following in this documentary was a son of a Hamas uh, troop, soldier. So, but the BBC didn't let any of that out. But they wanted to make sure, let's get this, the viewpoint that the poor Palestinians, the poor downtrodden, it's almost like the David versus Goliath type of thing. We all vote, we all root for David in that, because he's going up against this big monster and he wins. So there's that storyline that people see that, Israel has capabilities, we have nuclear weapons, all of those things, and Gaza doesn't have any of that. So therefore, Israel is wrong and Gaza is right. But if you zoom out from Israel and then you see the 25 Arab countries that surround Israel, Muslim countries, Israel is actually the David in all of this. That one little sliver of land that they want to make sure that doesn't exist anymore either. So it's propaganda is what it is. And unfortunately, people are buying into the propaganda.
Thank you. So let's move on. Let's unpack Maha. So
Okay.
the Maha movement here, what are the attitudes about RFK, Robert F. Kennedy, being the Secretary of Health and Human Services, especially in the context of global vaccination efforts? Again, Kevin, you and I were both fighting against the mRNA vaccination. And I shouldn't even call it a vaccination because we all know it was a bioweapon. So we are both fighting against it. You recently, before you moved to Israel, you spoke in Congress in Wisconsin. But what are you hearing there about the movement? What are people talking about? Are they hoping that, and I mean, I don't know anything, did they force the vaccinations in Israel? Let's unpack that.
So, this is all hearsay, I guess, on my part, because I wasn't here for COVID. So, I've been involved a little bit here in the medical freedom, I guess, in the populace and on Telegram and whatnot. So I know quite a few people. Ilana Rachel Daniel is a dear friend of mine. She's a ferocious leader in all of this here. So, the viewpoint, obviously, yes, COVID, the shots were pushed really, really hard here. But I don't believe that the media was honest in saying, I think they're saying 95 or 96% of people in Israel were vaccinated. I don't think that's true, because I don't know that many people here, and just strangers. You get to talking to strangers, and they say, "Oh, I didn't take it." So a lot of people didn't take it. A lot of people had fake green passes, which were the cards you needed to go anywhere, to go to a restaurant, to go shopping. So there was a lot of fake things going on. So I don't know how many people actually got vaccinated or not, but it was a very high amount. Don't get me wrong, and there have been, a lot of complications from that. Myocarditis, the cancer rates have exploded here, and things like that too.
But did you
So
tracking the cancer upticks? I mean, I know here we have VAERS and, providing a doctor, somebody goes in there and they input that. I mean, have you seen a huge uptick in the cancer?
from what I understand, it exists. I personally have not seen it because I'm not in those systems. I don't know how to check that out in the MOH, in the Ministry of Health or anything. But when I'm talking to people, cancer, especially in children, seems to have really gone up. And not just that, but diabetes has really skyrocketed here, ironically enough. Like diabetes of all the, I haven't heard that the COVID vaccine causes diabetes, so I'm not sure if one has to do with the other. But
The kidney.
there are definite issues here. So yeah, I don't have a great answer, unfortunately, because I'm not a researcher, I'm not a scientist, I'm not in that realm, so I can't give you stats or anything. All I can tell you is the people that I'm associated with, many of them did not take the vaccine. most of them are excited about Bobby Kennedy, even though, Israel doesn't really fall under his jurisdiction. So it's, but Israel always tries to emulate America. And so hopefully, by seeing what Bobby's doing to the CDC and stuff, that will transfer over here and have a positive impact here on people's health.
Okay. Let's talk a little bit about chemtrails. What are you seeing there?
Yeah. Well, it's funny that you bring it up because I keep having this coughing attack. And for the last 4 days, we have been sprayed like crazy. The mornings start out beautiful. It's a beautiful spring time here in Israel where everything's blooming and you have these deep blue, rich skies in the morning. And then the airplanes start. Sometimes it's 11 a.m., sometimes it's noon. And you see them start crisscrossing the sky. And I joked the other day with my wife because we were outside on a walk, and I see they're spraying at that moment. And I'm like, oh, it must be sponsored by Adidas because there's 3 stripes going across the sky all at once. So it looked like the Adidas symbol, and then they started going in circles. So ever since, that was like 4 days ago that I started seeing a real heavy spraying time here, and we've all been sick. I know so many people who are sick right now, and how do you combat that? Like, I like to go outside, I like to run, we have a dog that I'd like to take for walks. You got to be outside, and they're spraying you with God knows what, and our bodies aren't intended to fight off all of that stuff. These are chemicals and aluminum and borium and whatever they put in it. Like, I don't know all the ingredients, but it's not good. That much I can tell you. And it makes the whole sky just this, drab, milky grossness. Like, let me see the blue. I miss the blue. Like, who told you that you can just block out the sun? I didn't vote for that. And, they're just doing it all over the world without consent. It really, it's one of the things that makes me so angry. Like, I always say, if I had an RPG, I would just shoot all those planes down. I'd love to do that. But these, the pilots, they're doing it to themselves. That's what I don't understand. These pilots are doing it to their own families, to themselves, and they do it anyway. Like that, it blows my mind.
Right.
But it's bad here. The spraying has been horrible here.
And I know that RFK is going to start battling the chemtrails. Hopefully,
Hallelujah.
once he starts, that the Israel will follow suit on that.
I hope so. Absolutely.
So let's get to the final question, and let's talk about how you believe the Maha movement and America First initiatives can have momentum on Israel's approach to health.
Well, again, I think it comes down to a common sense approach. When Israel uses the same studies that America uses to determine their plan of action for vaccination. They use the CDC. They use whatever safe and effective studies are out there, that make them believe these vaccines are safe and effective. So I think by having Bobby in office, he's going to bring to light some of the fraud that was involved. And a great book about this that already exists is Turtles All the Way Down: Vaccine Science and Myth, written by Israeli doctors and scientists who remain anonymous to this day. But that is a fantastic book that covers every childhood vaccine and the fraud that went into those studies, how long they studied each vaccine after they were administered, 3 days, 5 days, that sort of stuff. So hopefully people will start hearing about these types of realities and start questioning, like, is that why my kid is sick? And you would like to see the doctors start questioning that instead of just believing their medical schools that vaccines are safe and effective and take their 4 hours of vaccine study for their college career and start administering all these vaccines to their patients. That's what I'd like to see, is have it come from a grassroots, but also from the top down and meet in the middle. And the middle is our children. The children, we're not healthier as you know, the Israeli children, the US children, nobody's healthier than they were in the 1950s, right? I mean, it's just gotten worse all the time. And yeah, you can still live longer, perhaps, with all these medical interventions that are costing you fortunes. But what if we didn't have chemicals in our food? What if we didn't inject aluminum and formaldehyde and all these things into babies? Um, I think, you know, we might have a better chance of a healthier populace. And so hopefully that's what comes about through Bobby's incredibly important work is getting doctors to think about what they've been taught. Was it accurate? Who funded their studies? You know, all of these things. And hopefully we'll see some change in the medical industry.
That's what we're actually hoping and praying for here with that. Are there a lot of like functional, holistic, homeopathic type of medical doctors? Is it easy to find?
It is. There's a lot of, yes, that type of care here. So just here, my town is very small, but I have an acupuncturist, a massage therapist, a chiropractor, a naturopathic doctor. You know, everybody's here. So it's a very great holistic community in that sense. And you know, it exists everywhere. It's not just in the community where I live. So they're definitely, it's more accessible and it's a lot cheaper than the US too. And insurance covers a lot more here for those type of alternative treatments than it does in the US as well. So that's a real benefit about
Oh, that's
the Israeli system.
awesome. How easy is it to get organic food there?
You know, I wish I could say that it's a lot easier than the US, but it's not. It's hard. You have to find. I mean, every store has a small organic section, but I mean, I was used to, you know, like the Whole Foods type place where you go in and you got all your produce, you got everything is organic. That
Food
doesn't exist here, and
and
gluten free, right? Right.
Whole Foods doesn't even carry a lot of organic stuff, and even a lot of their packaging. It's went to their 365, and I have to tell you,
Mm.
I went to look for a cupcake for a friend of ours. It was his birthday. And I started looking at the ingredients on every cupcake, every cake, and it was the last word on it was bioengineered foods. And
Ah, bugs. Is that what
I,
that means?
Park City, Utah, I asked for the manager of the store and I asked them, I'm like, we pay extra to come to Whole Foods. Why are we seeing bioengineered food? And what he told me is that Whole Foods, they don't have a decision on what they're making when it comes to their baked goods. And I would have to take it up with their corporate office. But most people aren't really looking at the ingredients, especially when it comes to, hey, I need to go get a cupcake or a birthday cake because they're thinking that they're
Mm.
somewhat healthy. And when you look at the ingredients, how disgraceful is it for Whole Foods to be, having that? I'm glad they're not hiding it. But how could they? There are alternatives. You don't need that type of stuff there. Um, I'm going to let you wrap up. What would you like to tell our listeners about Israel, the truth about living there and the safety and what you see as a dad and a husband?
So one of the reasons I came to Israel was for the quality of life for families. I visited here in the summer of 22 for my 17th time, and it was it was just something that really stood out because of the madness that was happening in the US with the transgender stuff, with you know kids seemingly hating their parents more. And it was night and day when I came here and I saw the relationships that parents had with their children, perception that everyone in Israel is living on eggshells and it's such a fearful place. It's completely false. It's a very family oriented country, very, very safe. Like I never feel like I'm in danger. Granted, we have a war, but that happens. But in your everyday life, when you're shopping or going out, you don't, as much as you have to keep your head on a swivel sometimes, just because of terrorists. It's I know it sounds crazy, like just because of terrorists, it's still pretty safe, but it does feel that way. Like you don't think about it on an everyday basis. I don't think that, my son, he goes to baseball practice and it's about an hour train ride away. I don't think that he's in danger getting on the train or taking the bus or any of that. And, he doesn't encounter anything. And I think that's the biggest misperception that people have about Israel is that you feel like you're in danger all the time. I knew somebody who was coming over here who was going to get full-time security for the person they were sending over. I'm like, don't do that. It's very, very safe. Don't do that. But that happens. People do have that perception, and I'd say besides that, Israel it's historic. There's very few places on this earth that are more historic than Israel, and it's a very spiritual place. I just love it. I love it here, and may God continue to protect this place.
All right. And I do have one final question. Human trafficking. What do you see in Israel as far as children, adult women, even men? What are you seeing there with human trafficking?
Personally, I've not been involved in or seen anything like that. Like I said, I'm also in a very small town. Does that stuff happen in Tel Aviv, perhaps, in Jerusalem, maybe? But I don't hear about that or see it here ever. I never see a child who's fearful at all. So I can't really speak to that. I just don't see it.
Okay. Well, Kevin, thanks. We're wrapping up. I'll let you drink your water.
Okay, thank you, Laurie. It was really great speaking with you. And, God bless America. God bless Israel. And I hope to see you again someday in person.
Yes, and God bless President Trump. Thank you,
Amen.
Kevin. Thank you. Give my love
Bye.
to Connie.
Will do. Thank you.